In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law by President George Bush. This was the most important civil rights legislation since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And this was intended to be a comprehensive piece of legislation that aimed at eliminating the long-standing barriers that had deprived people with disabilities of access and opportunity and inclusion. This made discriminatory treatment illegal. One of the disability rights advocates that helped make the ADA was Justin Dart. He was born in 1930 and he died in 2002. Justin Dart was from an affluent family in Texas. He contracted polio in his late teens, and during his recovery was greatly influenced by the teachings and ideas of Mahatma Gandhi, which influenced him for the rest of his life. Justin enrolled in the University of Houston, where he earned a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in history and political science by 1954, and he wanted to be a teacher. But the university rejected his efforts to attain a teaching certificate because of his disability. Now, that experience shifted his interest from teaching to business, and he became a very successful international entrepreneur, working particularly in Japan. And in this realm, he was able to ensure access and opportunities for people with disabilities. And it was while working in Japan that Justin Dart met and married his wife, Yoshiko Saji. In 1966, Justin was deeply moved by visiting a polio rehabilitation center for children in Vietnam, seeing firsthand the squalid and insufficient conditions that the children faced. Now, this event shook him and began his turn, that is, his change in interest from business toward activism. The couple devoted the next 6 years of their lives to meditation and study in rural Japan, during which time they made the decision to focus all of their time and energy on disability rights. They moved to the United States, settling in Texas in 1974, and there the work of disability justice began. He became a champion of disability rights in the state, and the governor of Texas appointed him to the governor's committee for persons with disabilities. Justin's activism reached national attention, and in 1981, President Ronald Reagan appointed him as vice chair of the National Council on Disability. Through the 1980s, he worked tirelessly for disability rights and for the establishment of a disability rights bill, visiting every state of the union to lobby legislators, to meet with influencers, to raise public awareness. Dart, with others on the council, drafted a national policy that called for civil rights legislation to end the centuries-old discrimination against people with disabilities. And this would eventually become the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Now, the ADA states its goal was to provide a clear and comprehensive national mandate for the elimination of discrimination against individuals with disabilities. It prohibited employment discrimination and required equal treatment for those receiving state and federal services. It sought to ensure access to transportation, to housing, healthcare, voting, public accommodations, and that neither public nor private entities could discriminate against people with disabilities. The ADA was signed into law, as we've seen, by President Bush, who compared the event to the tearing down of the Berlin Wall, which had just occurred months before, in 1989. This was the culmination of decades of advocacy From Paul Strahan's American Federation of the Physically Handicapped in the 1940s and 50s, through Judy Heumann's Disabled in Action in the 1970s. But law cannot change culture and inherited ideas, at least not in the short term. So the primary arbiter of the ADA's effectiveness was and remains the court system. And there was resistance. There was backlash. The structural and institutional change that was required to make access, to tear down that wall of separation, faced opposition. There were always complaints, including about the financial impact of such a change. In the aftermath of the ADA, the media often presented stories about the use of the law to punish businesses and to unethically exploit the law for profit, showing how non-disabled people gained access to accommodations and unmerited resources, and also viewing some disabled people with skepticism. In addition, the majority of court cases that were filed were rejected by the courts, with much dispute over the proper interpretation of, and I quote, a person with disability, and whether they were truly qualified for the benefits. The verification of this disability, of course, as we've seen already in the course, was left to medical experts. The ADA, like the Civil Rights Act before, was truly a pivotal achievement. But it also shows the gap between the legislation and the power of culture to resist change and to perpetuate the lingering influence of stigma.